Thank you so much for joining us, Ram. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me here.
So what is the problem that you intended to solve with Pride Circle?
So the problem we're trying to solve here is of basic social equity. It's about everyone in society should have same rights, same access to all, which is available for all members of society effectively. There should not be biases, particularly about aspects of identity. That too goes beyond the individual's control.
And how important are conversations to further this idea of inclusion, considering you have been a part of multiple events as a speaker and you've been speaking about it thoroughly at every event that you go to or every event that you organize as a part of Pride Circle?
I think conversation is the key. Conversation is very important. I actually have a mantra on LGBT inclusion. It's called visibility. That leads to familiarity. With familiarity, you can have a conversation. Conversation leads to understanding, and understanding leads to acceptance. To give a very simple example, if you just go to talk to someone about aliens or zombies, people can talk about it because they're familiar with the topic. Though in reality, no one has ever met any of them, thankfully, right? But it's a familiar topic. You can have a conversation about it. And the beauty of conversation is when two people talk, they can exchange ideas, and then they get to know, oh, I thought this is this way, but you get ideas, you exchange ideas, and then you get to know what the truth is between information, misinformation, and the actual reality. And that leads to actual engagement and more learning about the topic. It's about engaging with the difference. The fact that this is something I don't know anything about, or I might have biases about, but till the time I'm willing to engage, till the time I'm open up to listening, to having a conversation, that bridge exists where we can figure out what is misinformation and what is truth and reality. So I think conversation is very important.
Now, going forward to the community aspect of it, what is the narrative that you have in mind and how are you trying to further it? So is it around just skills and that gender does not define you as a person who's fit for a role? Or is it something more than that, about like rising to an occasion of getting whatever you want to, except if you're not belonging to a certain community, that should not restrict you? So what is it?
So I think it's a part of both. So one of my favorite movies is Ratatouille. Probably would have watched it. In this, there is a chef who writes a book, and the title is "Anyone Can Cook." And in the movie, it's about a rat who's a brilliant chef, right? The fact that it's not that anyone can cook means everyone can cook. The fact that a cook can be anyone, right? The same thing applies for in this context. When we talk to companies about inclusion and opportunity, it's about anyone can do that work. Like that skill set can come in any shape and size and can have any sexual orientation or gender identity. We should not discriminate people for who they are. When we talk about a meritocracy, when we talk about values at the workplace and what you bring to the table, let's focus on the skill set and not who the individual is. Let's not focus on what their sexual orientation is or what their gender identity is. How do we create a workplace where people of all backgrounds, all different kinds of faiths, beliefs, and identities can come together as a team, because effectively you are here to solve a certain problem? And how do we create a culture of a workplace where personal identifiers don't make a difference? They're celebrated instead of being discriminated against. So that's the narrative.
Talking about the aspect of stories, like you mentioned, Ratatouille was a story for you that kind of inspired you. You also published a blog where you cover the stories of people coming out from the community. And what are some of the most challenging issues that you see in those stories when it comes to them not being able to fit into a workplace?
So a part of the coming out stories was also because my own journey of coming out at work, right? When you walk into a workplace and everyone has, so like simply thing I'll say, like, let's say me and a friend of mine joins a certain company and both of us have similar expectations of the work we're supposed to do. But I have the additional work to fit into that narrative, right? A lot of times when we say like, hey, do we talk about sexuality at the workplace? And the answer is no, we don't. But we do talk about it. We talk about our kids and their birthdays, and we talk about, we invite our colleagues to our weddings, we talk about a girlfriend and boyfriend and all of that. So I'm saying that sexuality is such an inherent assumption that I see someone on the street, I just assume their sexuality without even consciously making that assumption. So when people join a workplace and we don't talk about LGBT inclusion, by default we're assuming that every employee is heterosexual and cisgender. And when as an individual you don't fit that expectation, all the onus to fit is on you. So what that leads to is distancing from colleagues and co-workers. I personally would not like to hang out with my colleagues after work, or on tea breaks or things like that. And a lot of time that does hamper my team building, does show me in a poor light in terms of maybe he's not very outgoing, he's not very great team player. But it is not that I don't have a certain skill set, right? People lose out not because they have a certain skill set, but because the culture is not inclusive. There's always this fear of what if people get to know. So watching how you're talking, what you're sharing, all of that. And that takes a toll because now effectively you're doing two jobs. One job is hiding yourself and the other job is the work performing. And Stonewall, which is a UK-based organization, they did a research and they found that there's a loss of productivity by up to 30% for people who are not out at work because they're spending so much time and energy trying to just fit in and keep people at a distance.
Now, your mission at Pride Circle is to promote and achieve social equity. Like you just mentioned that a person does not need to be self-conscious, they need to just be able to express themselves so that they're not wasting their efforts trying to hide a part of them. How do you intend to do that? So this events is one portion of it. What are the other activities that you do around the same?
So we work on three pillars. One is about focus on the LGBT community and work with them. One is about employers. So a lot of our work is around corporate employment and engagement. And third piece is around content and research around this topic. So when we talk about working with the community, it's about building that bridge. So when you build a bridge, it's a two-way street. It's not one set will do everything and the other will not have to take any step. Both have to take steps in that sense. So when we talk about building bridges, because sometimes when you say someone has been marginalized their entire life and bullied for the one thing that you are not allowed to be, that becomes a very strong identity element. Like let's say if I'm a trans person and that has been the cause of rejection from family, school, bullying, all of that, who I am, the trans part stands a lot. So sometimes we have to also work with people to ensure that now we're talking about employable skills. Let's talk about what you bring to the table and focus on so many more things which makes you along with your trans identity and not just that identity, right? So we do a lot of skill building programs called Road to Rise, where we did interviewing skills, career counseling, resume writing, all of that. We also do a lot of other fun things like storytelling around then financial literacy. The aspect is about how do we really build skill set with people so that they find themselves more employable. We're also working on some long-term projects also where they actually do specific educational programs which are directly related to employment. Then we also have, we do like Pride Month celebration and all of that, space for meetups, space for sharing stories, space for building that community. And we also have the mentoring program, which is Outgrow, which is India's first mentoring program where both the mentees and the mentors are from the community. So what happens for a lot of LGBT people is that you have to choose whether you can have a career or you can have your identity. The fact that if I come out at work and people get to know that I'm gay, all my work might go for a thrash and I'll just be known as the gay guy. Right? And what if I came out and these are not irrational fears. Like there have been instances in school, there have been instances in society at large, and hence people are so scared about it. And there have been instances where people have been let go from work because of who they are. Obviously, no one fires them for saying that, hey, you're firing me because they're LGBT, but just that there will be systematic process where your work is slowly cut down, you're dissociated from team meetings, and eventually it becomes enough proof to say that I don't think you're performing the best. So these are very rational and real fears. So we, to the mentoring program, the aspect of having someone from the community as a mentor is like, they're doing something really well in their chosen field of work, and they're also out. And how do we really learn and we rope well so that we can replicate that in more and more young people, so they don't have to choose between a career and their identity, they can have both in that sense, right? We also do a lot of meetups which are about spaces for speed mentoring and also spaces about just sharing your story, so building a lot of confidence within the community in a certain sense. From the corporate perspective, we do a whole bunch of work, from assessment of policies to culture, like where they stand and how they can get to a better place where they're more inclusive, they're more aware employees. So we do sensitization trainings, we do audits. We also have a reverse mentoring program for business leaders. So for business leaders to have a better understanding of the LGBT community, so that you can not just build policies and culture, but also feel how do you really utilize the LGBTI talent pool, right? In a certain sense, how do you really empower them to bring their whole self to work and actually leverage it in a certain sense, right? Then we also did India's first ever LGBTI job fair. which was in 2019 in Bangalore. So we also work around research and content in terms of allyship guide, around transition at the workplace with the guide, what should the various steps be, how can companies support them, all of that.
Now, talking about the research paper aspect of it, a lot of data or statistics around the target group that you're dealing with is still missing in the Indian context, I'd say. So what are some of the shocking facts or figures that you have come across, majorly in the workspace or idly across the country, if you have any?
So there are a lot of shocking stats in certain sense. I think there was one research which said 92% of trans people do not have access to employment. So that basically means out of 10 people, only one of trans people are able to find gainful employment. The fact that there's so much discrimination they face that they are not able to sustain themselves when it comes to not just discrimination at the workplace, but aspects like housing, getting a transport to a workplace, all of that becomes barriers for people. So one of the survey which I was part of, which did MINGLE in 2016, called the Workplace Climate Survey, and we found that 40% of LGBT people face reporting harassment at the workplace. 2/3 of them said they hear homophobic comments and jokes, and a fifth of them faced harassment from their own manager or HR. So the very people who are supposed to help you, guide you, are the people bullying you. So at Pride Circle, we focus more on how do we reduce those statistics? How do we build those resources so that people find the right tools to leverage and change the statistics from 1/5 managers who are harassing to maybe 4/5 of the managers who become really true champion allies and really support LGBT employees. So right now we're working on a very cool ally guide, which talks about the entire journey of a person. So we're talking about parents. How can parents be allies? How can siblings be allies? And also adding stories of people from real life who are actually champion allies. It's about stories of a mother, story of a sister. Then we're looking at schools and colleges. So we're looking at how can schools become better and safer. And there are some schools that are doing really great work, like the Tagore International in Delhi. Then we're working with other engineering colleges, business colleges to add elements of inclusion, of allyship, and also examples of how it has been done. And then the larger focus definitely is on workplaces, how various workplaces have turned around their culture to ensure that people find inclusion. And it's not just about, when you talk about inclusion, it's not about just hiring people, right? It's hiring is just the first step, but you also have to ensure that they feel safe and also build the right opportunities for them to grow their career.
So being a for-profit organization in the social space, how do you see both of those aspects coming together to create change?
I think both Srini and I come from corporate workspaces, so I think that hangover continued in that sense. And we started with the for-profit entity because, and it's a bootstrapped organization, so we both have put our own personal monies into this to build a model which is sustainable, to build a model which is scalable, to build something where we can take companies together and civil society together. I think we have done really well in terms of that. If you look at the journey since 2017, well, we started with 4 people, now we have a membership of 3,000 plus. We have touched around 30,000 plus lives. We have done more than 100 meetup, not just across India, but also in spaces like Seattle, London, New York. So we have taken the conversation. We have really built a global platform in a certain sense. From organizing India's first ever job fair, now we have placed around more than 60 people in different organizations. And when we talk about the one interesting thing we also, so when we talk about taking the whole society together, the other aspect we're looking at is not just providing employment to LGBT people and the skill building program part of it, but we're also working with LGBT owned businesses as entrepreneurs and supporting them so that that also becomes an opportunity for generating more and more employment, but also enabling LGBT owned businesses in that sense. So we have something called LGBT Marketplace in our Rise editions, where we get 20 LGBT owned businesses to set up their stalls. They can make a sale there of the product and service, and also encourage our larger corporate clients to look at them from a supplier diversity perspective. So it's about really making change in all aspects of our operation. But I think that said, we are also working to set up our foundation wing. It'll be a hybrid model of both foundation and for-profit entity, with the for-profit would work primarily on corporate consulting, and the foundation wing would help us working with the community in terms of more grants for better and more deep dive skill building programs, education awareness, and all of that.
Now, moving on to the last bit of the conversation, I'd like for you to give a one-line advice to a particular set of people. So what would be that one line of advice for CSR heads or corporates in general?
Engage. Sometimes we are so scared to engage because this is a new area, we don't know anything about it. What if we say something wrong? So rather, people won't have a conversation with the trans person because what if I offend them? So my first answer is just engage. Uh, just start learning. It's a journey for everyone. It's a new journey. For everything, we start something from unknown and then get to the known. And for that to happen, you have to start engaging.
And what would be that one line of advice for innovators in the space?
I think innovators, particularly, it's important that you look at things which no one else is looking at. How do you find that niche which no one else has been able to look at, and finding solutions, creating, because at the end of the day, even if you look at products and services, is today is a world of customization. The more customized solutions we can offer, the more better be able to target audience. All of that, be it digital marketing, be it kind of products and services which comes out, it's all about hyper customization. So I think it's important that we look at various facets of our larger society and also look like this is also a viable market segment, because I think the global purchasing power of the LGBT community stands at roughly around $4 billion right now. That's a big purchasing power. So I think it's important that we look at that from a business perspective as well.
So that brings us to the close of the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Ram.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Pleasure talking to you. Have a good day.